5. I did post grades, so I'm assuming you all saw them. Overall, the exams were good, but I saw 3 people that need to take the exam, so that's why I'm not going to give it back to you just yet, okay? If you are like desperate to see it, you have to see yours, you can come to my office and I'll show it to you, but I'm not going to distribute here in class today. I will give them back to you though at some point, unless you want to see it sooner than that. Okay, so you guys hopefully remember that on Monday we did start chapter 5 on cost, volume, profit relationships. And I spent a good bit of that time just kind of talking about this template that I like to use that provides us with all the variables we need to perform our cost, volume, profit analysis. So, and everybody should have, I gave out the PowerPoints, right, on Monday, so we're good there. And I just wanted to put this back up here before I get started today, kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of the cost, volume, profit analysis. So we're going to go through some examples on the board. We're actually going to have to write this template again for another example that we're going to use to kind of reinforce the examples that are given in the PowerPoints. They help us to kind of give us an opportunity to practice. Yeah, and remember, you don't have to memorize formulas, right? Everybody remembers that? Yes? Okay. All right. So phones away, please, because I'm starting now. All right. Oops. There we go. Yeah, I didn't really, so this first slide, I think it's kind of misplaced, but I left it where it was, is really just talking about how we get some of these answers up here. So you'll see up here it says variable expense ratio. And we talked about where we got these from. So the variable expense ratio, we took 300 and we divided by $500, right? You guys remember that? And then the contribution margin ratio, I took 200 and I divided by 500. Now let me remind you what all that is. So we've got our contribution format income statement, which is just kind of perfect as far as cost, volume, profit analysis goes, because for cost, volume, profit analysis, I'm trying to understand relationships between cost, what I pay for my products, volume, how much of something, that's my level of activity, my X, and my profit, right? So this format is particularly works well with that cost, volume, profit analysis. So we maintain, though, our variables, our sales, our variable costs, our contribution margin, and in some cases fixed costs and net operating profit at different units, right, or different representation, total, per unit values, and then ratios, right? And if we understand, and I believe it was 500 bikes, that was how many bikes, and this was racing bicycle, if you recall, RBC, right? Sold 500 bikes at $500 a piece. That's where we get total sales of $250. And I could back into that per unit cost as well. I could take 250 divided by 500 and get 500, right? I might have, as long as I have 2 variables, I can figure out the third, right? Okay. And then our variable costs, they vary in direct proportion to changes in levels of sales. So if my sales go up, my variable costs will go up. If my sales decrease, my variable costs will decrease. But 150,000 divided by 500 bikes is 300, right? Or $300 times 500 bikes is 150,000 in variable costs. So what does that mean? It means if we sold a bike for $500, it costs us $300 to make 1 bike. We sell 500 bikes, those totals are $250 and $150. And then we come down to contribution margin, which just represents the amount I have left over to cover my fixed costs and have some profit, right? So my contribution margin in total dollars was 100,000. My per unit value is 200. And again, so if I sell a bike for 500, it costs me $300 to make it. I've got 200 bucks left over to cover my fixed costs and have some profit, right? And 20,000 was my net operating income. Now, the goal with any organization, I'm going to assume, is to increase the bottom line, right? We call this our bottom line. This would be our net operating income. We want to do better. And so we're going to try to think of ways where we can do that. And that's really what this whole chapter is about. What if I do this? How does that impact cost, volume, profit? That's what cost, volume, profit analysis is all about. The ratio, I told you to think about like $1, right? If I sell a candy bar for $1, 60 cents of it is what I paid for the candy bar at the candy store that I bought the fundraising candy bars from, and my profit's 40 cents a candy bar, right? So this describes that extra in our unit value. This describes the extra in a dollar amount. So, everybody good with that? The other way I could have gotten this, and I think I explained this the other day, you'll have to forgive me, I have a cost accounting class, which is just like a more in-depth version of this course, and it's at 1 o'clock, and then I can't remember if I said what I said in the 11 o'clock class or if I said it in the 1 o'clock class, because it's all very related. So anyway, I use per unit values because what this percentage is really how much of my sales price is represented by variable costs. How much of my selling price is represented by contribution margin. So 300 divided by 500 is 60, 200 divided by 500 is 40. But I can also use the totals. You guys remember that? I can use the totals. So again, I could have taken 100,000, and you have to just be consistent here. I could do 100,000 divided by 250,000, and that still gives me the 40%, right? Or I could have done 150,000 divided by 250, and I get the same thing. Just don't mix per unit values with totals. You can use either to calculate those percentages. And that's what this formula on this board is. That's the percentage, how to calculate the variable expense ratio. So here's another thing. If you're like, well, where is that on here? Variable. And if it makes you feel better, we can call these variable expenses and fixed expenses. It doesn't really matter. Variable cost, fixed cost, they're the same. Variable expense ratio, wherever that column and row meet up, that's your number, right? So that's just the first formula that you're introduced to. But in my opinion, that formula makes no sense unless you understand the whole template. So that's my feeling on that. So the next one, contribution margin ratio, same idea. Let me see something here. Okay. Anyway, I just making sure my total numbers were correct. They're giving what ifs here. I don't want you to worry about these numbers down here because these don't match mine right now. They will eventually, but here's the formula. Contribution margin divided by sales. That's what I did. Took the contribution margin divided by sales. 200 divided by 500 or 100,000 divided by 250. And we also talked about, I hope we talked about what these, I wrote this down. Did you guys write this down, these interpretations? This is for every one additional unit, right, sold. You guys remember that? No? Yeah. Okay. Did you write that down?
Yes.
Okay. I hope so, because you're going to have to know it for the next exam. Right? So we have $200 left to cover fixed costs and net operating income. And this percentage is for every $1 of what? In sales. 40 cents is left to cover fixed costs and profit or income. Okay, so what you see up here on the screen is kind of where I started, and like I went backwards a little bit, but that's okay. So they're showing you the totals at two different levels of activity, right? And the first couple of examples on those slides actually were based on 400 units. My template there up on the board is obviously based on 500 units. But let's talk about 400 units, okay? So, and the reason that I know why they're starting, or why they started here, I would have kind of backed into this, but at 400 units, if you sell 400 bikes, sales are 200,000. Somebody tell me how you get 200,000 at 400 bikes. Where's that total come from?
So 50.
You sell 400 of them at what price? Up 50. Say it there. 500. Yeah. $500 per bike times 400 bikes is $200,000. Right? Okay. Notice that your variable expenses are less at 400 units than they are at 500 units. Why? Because you made 100 less bikes, so you got $100 less in materials, labor, and overhead.
Really quick, what's NOI?
Net operating income?
Oh, okay.
Take a look, net operating income. It's up here written out, but I just abbreviated for the sake of time. Where's the 120 come from? $120,000 in variable costs. Okay, so how much does it cost to make one bike based on my template? My template. $300, right? And how many bikes in this column? 400. So $300 times 400 bikes is $120,000 of variable cost, right? So if you sell 400 bikes at $500 a piece, your total sales are $200,000. It costs you $300 per bike to make those 400 bikes. That's $120,000. So what you have left over, your contribution margin is $80,000. So that's how much you have left over to cover your fixed costs and have profit. So what do you notice about 400 units? What's kind of distinctive there? What sticks out? No profit. So we just made enough money to do what? Break even. Yeah. What does that mean? Break even means that you're covering just your expenses and you have nothing left over. Now, no one likes to break even, I guess, unless you're gambling, but I don't gamble, so I don't know. Variable costs and fixed costs. These two added together, these are your total costs, right? So if you think about it, if you're starting a business, someone tell me in real life why I would care about how many units I know I need to sell, or how much profit I need to have, or how much sales revenue I need to have before I break even. Why is that important to me as a business owner? Okay, but why? Yeah, so it's more about how much I have to sell, right, in order just to pay my bills. And as a business owner, I kind of need to know what that number is so that I know if I'm, if it's the middle of the month and I reach that number, I'm happy. Because every unit that I sell over 400 becomes pure what? Profit. Every unit now that I sell, if I make 400 units in sales, like in the first 2 weeks of the month, right? I'm probably pretty thrilled because every unit thereafter is all profit. Why? Because I've covered all of my expenses, right? At 400 units, I have no net income. At unit 401, how much net income do you think I have? Not 500. 200. Very good. Yes, look. Well, no, look up here. Because every unit gives me $200. You see what I'm saying? You got to really, this data is simple, but it's really powerful. It has a lot of capabilities. There's a lot of analysis and critical thinking we can do using this. Every additional unit I sell above 400 is pure profit. I want to hit that number as quickly as I can in the month, right? If I'm looking at this as a monthly thing. If I don't have at least $200,000 in sales, what's my problem going to be? I'm going to be negative. I'm going to have a loss, right? And let's think about it. If I sell 0 bikes, okay, bear with me. If I sell 0 bikes, this is 0, isn't it? What's this? Let's say that I only make bikes if I get an order for one. It's 0. Yeah. And so what's my contribution margin? But what are my fixed costs? They're still 80. They're fixed. I kind of like to use this example. Like, if you have a car payment and, you have a job, and you have a car payment and you lose your job, you get laid off or something like that. You still have to pay your car payment, right? That's a fixed cost. You can't call up the bank that you borrowed the money from and say, well, I lost my job, so if you wouldn't mind. No, it doesn't vary with your level of activity. It is fixed. And so even if you don't have enough revenue, you still have to cover those fixed costs. Now, this becomes critical to seasonal types of businesses. Give me an example of a seasonal type of business.
Lawn care.
Lawn care, okay, that's a great one. Let's go the opposite season.
Snowplow.
Snowplow, okay, what else? Christmas tree farm. Come on, you guys know more.
Water park.
Water park, yeah. Amusement parks, water parks in general, right? How about a ski resort, right? I was somewhere, I was in Ohio last weekend and I was on the turnpike and I, just out of the corner of my eye, and it was warm. It was like 50, well, warm for here, 50 some degrees, and at the corner of my eye I caught, there was a ski slope. And I mean, of course, the only thing that was white was the ski slope. And I obviously, I know you make, I don't ski personally, but they make your own snow. And I thought, that has to be a mess. I don't care how much snow you make, it's 56 degrees. That can't really be all that fun because it's probably really wet, right? You think a ski resort's like this kind of weather we've been having, like the last 2 or 3 weeks or maybe 4 weeks? No, not at all. Because they hope to make enough revenue to cover their expenses all year long particularly during times like the summer, when they're not in their busiest, we're not selling, ski passes, right? Now I know they have off-season kinds of revenue generating things, happening, festivals and, things like that, but it's still not going to bring in as much revenue as ski passes would have brought in, right? And so there are gonna be certain times of the year where their fixed expenses are fixed. It doesn't matter if it's June, July, or August, the ski resort still has to pay their fixed expenses that are necessary for them to operate from October to March, when they like to be really super busy, right? So you gotta know what that number is. That number is really critical if you're a business owner. And you also have to understand what contribution margin per unit means. Once I hit that, once I sell 400 bikes, every bike above 400, so bike 401, 402, 403, those bikes bring me $200 each additional income. It's all pure profit. Make sense? Okay. I always just like to make sure that we're on the same page before we hit these formulas kind of heavy here. So here's the next thing that we're going to do. And you guys are going to write this in your notes, because this is going to be something that we look at for the rest of the chapter. So this is another scenario. This little place is called Coffee Klatch. It's an espresso stand. You guys like espresso? Makes my heart race. I don't drink it. Okay. So, and we are going to be doing an analysis, like to kind of check, making sure, like reinforcement. So I'm going to set another template, but this one's for Coffee Klatch. So that's what you guys are going to do too in your notes, because there are going to be points in time where I don't have this on the board, and I'm going to need you to help me out. So we need a total column. We need a per unit column. And we need a ratio percentage, however you'd like to express that column. And we're going to, again, be looking at sales, variable cost or variable expense, however you want to say that. And I'm abbreviating, obviously, for the sake of time. So please make sure you know what all my abbreviations stand for. But we're going to fill out this template. Even though we're only being asked one question right now in this little quick check, they call them, we are going to fill out the whole template, because then we can answer any questions with regards to CVP analysis and Coffee Klatch. I do love a good cup of coffee, but only like one or two, as hyper as it is. So coffee and me in the afternoon don't go along well.
What does CM stand for? Sorry.
Contribution margin.
Okay.
All right. So it says Coffee Klatch is an espresso stand in a downtown office building. The average selling price of a cup of coffee is $1.49. That's some cheap coffee, isn't it? And the average variable expense per cup is 36 cents. So translation, they typically sell a cup of coffee for $1.49, and 36 cents is what it costs them to make a cup of coffee. Coffee beans and some water, I imagine, right? The average fixed expense per month is $1,300. And then it asks the question, and then it says an average of 2,100 cups are sold each month. What is the CM ratio? Don't even look at the question right now. We're going to go right to the template first. So obviously my units here are cups of coffee. Would you agree? It's always kind of good to get an idea in your head of what that is. So our units are cups of coffee. How many cups of coffee does Coffee Klatch typically sell in a month? What does it tell us? So this is up here, 2,100 cups. Okay, we're going to fill in what we know, and then we're going to go back and fill in the rest. It says the average selling price of a cup of coffee is $1.49. So in my template, where does $1.49 go? Per unit? Sales, right? See where I'm going with this? And then it says the average variable expense per cup is 36 cents. Where does that go? Per unit? Variable expense or variable cost, right? Okay. So now can I figure out contribution margin now that I have these two numbers? Yeah, it's $1 what? Per cup, right? So every cup of coffee yields me $1.13 to cover fixed costs and net operating income. And remember, with per unit and ratio, we don't go any farther than the CM, right? We don't need to do the rest of those. Okay, so I can fill in the rest of this now, can't I? I have enough information. All right. Yeah, oh, I missed one. The average fixed expense per month is $1,300. Where does that go? Total fixed, yep. So that's going to go here. Okay, sorry, we need that. All right, so somebody tell me how I find my total sales. Multiply the total number of cups times what? $1.49 per unit, right? You charge $1.49 per cup of coffee and you sell 2,100 cups. What's your total sales? You guys have calculators, you're supposed to. And if you're sitting there saying, well, I don't need to do this because, yeah, that's easy, do it. Because if you don't do it, you're not going to remember it. I don't care if it's an easy calculation. Get the calculator out and punch the numbers in your calculators so that you know how to do it. Everybody understand where I got 3129? 2,100 cups times $1.49 a cup? Okay. How do I find my variable cost per cup, or I'm sorry, in total? Yep. 36 cents a cup times 2,100 cups means how much did I spend to make 2,100 cups of coffee? $756. Okay. It's pretty cheap to make a cup of coffee, huh? I don't know where you're getting a $1.49 cup of coffee. Certainly not down at, never mind. That's why I don't drink that stuff. I'm too cheap. So what's my contribution margin? 2373, right? So Coffee Klatch currently has how much in net operating income? $1,073. And that's for a whole month, okay? So far, so good? Anybody have any questions about where I got any of my numbers from?
So the 1,073, that's pretty much their profit.
That's their profit. You could call that net operating income, net operating profit, income, profit. Now we don't take into consideration taxes just because this is only a 100 level course, but yeah. All right, now I got to do my ratio. How do I start this out? What do I make? What assumption do I make about sales? 100%, because I deduct everything from my sales, right? So everything has to add back up to sales. Sales is equal to 100% of everything. Now, this isn't going to work out as nicely as you'd like it to. What I mean by that is it's not going to round nicely. So we're going to round, I guess 3 decimal places. No, we're around 2 decimal places. So what did you get? 24, yeah, so 24.1, let's do it that way. 24.1%, there's a reason I'm doing it that way. Here's the thing about rounding, and I don't know if I mentioned this before. Pick one way to round and do it that way all the time. Consistent rounding is how things work out to 0 later on, right? If I round to the nearest whole number one time and then 2 decimal places the next time, I'm not going to work out nicely. So we're going to carry it 1 decimal place over to because I just know. And this, remember, this is the same as this. Everybody understands that, right? If I want to convert that to a decimal, I move it 2 places to the left. I want to convert this to a percentage, I move it 2 places to the right, all right? So what's 100%? And again, assuming, if I look at this, if you guys don't like the way that's written, let's do it this way. 100%, 100.0% is the same as 100%, but the decimal there might make it easier for you to do the little math here, right? So I can just take 100% minus 24.1%, right? Or is it 24, wait, what was it? Was it 24.1 or 24.2? Is it 2? Okay, yeah, 24.2, sorry. All right, 24.2. Now, how did I get that number? Well, 0.36 divided by $1.49, right? What percentage of my total sales dollars is represented by variable cost? I can just do the simple subtraction here to get my contribution margin, or I can take $1.13 divided by $1.49, and I get the same answer, which is what? 75.8%. That's a pretty darn good contribution margin. For every $1 of sales, only 24 cents of it, about 24 cents, is expense. The other 75 cents goes to cover your fixed costs and profit. Pretty good contribution margin. Like I said, it's cheap to make coffee, I guess. All right, so now we got our little template. Everybody good? All right. And you understand that this is also 0.758. This is also 0.2 242. And 100% is also 1. All right, so I don't want you to get confused between the decimal equivalents. So it says, what is the CM ratio for coffee clutch? Here is the reason that I want you to do the template first, because with every question that we answer, we either have the answer in the template or we use variables within the template and plug them into a ratio formula and come up with the answer. So it's simple. So CM ratio, right? Look, CM, follow along up here. CM all the way over, ratio is this number here, isn't it? And it's expressed as a decimal up here, which is okay. That's why I showed you the decimal equivalents over here. But there's our solution. I forgot my watch today, and I didn't bring my phone. So if I start getting close to 10 till, can somebody yell, hey, Dr. Seidel, it's time to go, please? What time is it? 11:30. Okay. Somebody say it's close. All right. So here we're back to the original data. And again, we're going to use racing bicycles as an example. And as we work through the different analyses. And then we're going to kind of reinforce with this. And then we have exercises in the book. So we got lots of practice, right? I already went over this with you, by the way, and I'm not going to go over it again. I already did all this. I did this. I did this. And like I said, I kind of did it a little backwards. So, all right. So here's the next thing that we want to look at here. It's called the degree of operating leverage. And I'm only going to go through a few of these, and then we're going to do a little practicing. I don't like this order at all. Okay. All right, so something called operating leverage, and here's the formula. And again, what I'll do for the exam is I will give you a sheet with all the formulas on it, so you don't have to worry about that, okay? I'll give that to you. So, definition, operating leverage is a measure of how sensitive, and not like sensitive that I hurt your feelings sensitive. How sensitive net operating income is to percentage changes in sales. So listen to me carefully. What it measures is how sensitive, in other words, how quickly does my operating income, does this number change when this number changes by a certain percentage? That's what it's measuring, okay? It is a measure at any given level of sales of how a percentage change in sales volume will affect profits, just like I said. So there's the formula. Look how simple it is. Contribution margin divided by net operating income. And again, you got the template. Look, contribution margin divided by net operating income. It's that simple, okay? All of the numbers are on our template that we need for these formulas. So let's see what happens. I am confident you guys can plug those numbers in, but what I want to talk about is what it means. So again, contribution margin is 100,000, operating income is 20, 100 divided by 20 is 5. 5 what? Doesn't say anything. There's no dollar sign there, there's no percentage. Theoretically, that is 5 times. So that's kind of how you can write it this way, 5 times, or you can write it 5 times. I would prefer that label though, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. And I'm going to explain what it means. It represents, and you want to write this down. I don't know if it's on the next slide or not. Let me look. Okay, well, it's not really the way I want to say it. So it represents the number of times, there's that word times, by which operating income will increase for each percentage increase in sales. Five times. So, I'll let you guys write that down. That's why I use the word times or X there, because it's the number of times of something. All right, so look up here at this example. It says with an operating leverage of 5, that's what RBC's is. If RBC's increases its sales by 10%, in other words, if this goes up by 10%, okay, sales increase by 10%, the operating leverage says that your net income will go up by 50%, 10% times 5. And that seems like a lot. You're telling me I'm going to get a 50% increase in in profits, because my sales went up 10%? Yes, that's what it describes. So it's the number of times by which your net operating income is going to increase for every 1% increase in sales. Okay, and you might think that sounds like a lot, but guess what? We can prove it. All right, so let's think about it. If sales go up 10%, how many additional sales is that? Another 25,000, right? Yes? 10% of 250,000 is 25, so my sales go to 275. Before I turn to the next slide, because we'll see it there, what else is going to increase? My variable expenses are going to increase, because why? Because if I'm selling more bikes, then I got to make those bikes. And the variable costs, remember what I told you guys variable costs are? Who remembers what's in there? Yeah, I mean, technically, it ends up being cost of goods sold, but we're talking about direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, all the costs that go into making a product that we just got done testing on, right? So that's going to change, that's going to increase. What expense won't? Fixed costs won't. Okay, so let's see what we got. Just to prove this, here's the other kind of cool thing, is we can always prove these outcomes of these ratios, right? So here's what happens. If you sell 10% more in units, 10% of 500 is 50, so that's another 50 units, so now you're selling a total of 550. What did not change, guys, were these per unit values. So 550 units times $500 is $275, or we said another 25,000, because 10% of 250,000 is 25,000. 550 units at $300 is $165,000. Okay, so that gives me a little more contribution margin, obviously. Subtract fixed expenses, which did not change, and I end up with net operating income of 30. Now, 20,000 was my old operating income, 30,000 is my new. How do I determine what percentage increase that is? There's a formula. I don't know, like I used to teach econ. I haven't taught econ in a while. I always bring it up, I teach it a lot in there. But I always bring it up in accounting too, because it's a really important basic business math formula that everybody should know. Change over the original. Perfect. Yeah. So when you want to figure out the percentage change in anything, I don't care what it is, the percentage change in your tuition, the percentage change in your phone bill, the percentage change in your gas bill, the percentage change in your income. You take the change, and what he means by the change, he means the difference, the new minus the old, right? You can put it a couple of different ways, but we're going to take the new amount minus the old amount and divide by the old amount. So in this case, 30, and I don't really need to do this because this is simple math, minus 20, so the change is 10, right, divided by 20. So 10,000 divided by 20,000 is 50%, right? So why is that? Why do we care? I'm going to go back. Why do I care about increasing my sales by 10%? Because look at the huge impact it has on my net operating income. But see, if you don't understand the relationship between all of these variables, you're not going to be able to figure out by how much your net operating income could increase if you were able to increase your sales by 10%. And that's ultimately what you want to know. What's my bottom line going to be, right? You guys with me? Sure? Okay. Let's see. All right, coffee clutch. You tell me what operating leverage is. Contribution margin divided by net operating income. You guys have that on your PowerPoints there. This is how we practice. And I'm going to assume you need to carry that out a couple decimal places just based on the answers. What do you get? Ooh. That's not up there, is it? 2.21 what? Times. So for every 1% increase in sales, operating income is going to increase 2.21 times. So let's make sure you got the right formula there. And there in the little box, they show you the coffee clutch, part of the template that we already have up here. Contribution margin is 2373. Net operating income is 1073, and that's 2.21. So that means that for every percentage change in sale, for every 1% change in sales, operating income should increase 2.21 times. And here we go. It says if sales increase by 20%, how much should operating income increase by? So all I'm going to do is take my 2.21 times and multiply it by 20%, and what do I get? I get 44.2. So that's telling me, right, that if Coffee Clutch can increase coffee sales by 20%, up here, these sales by 20%, this net operating income should go up 44.2%, which is pretty significant, right? Without changing anything else. And I think there's a proof there on the next slide. There is. And you would find that change the same way. But you prove it by going back in and redoing the total column at the new amount of sales, the increased amount of sales. All right, any questions? All right, so I'm going to stop there because I'm going to give you guys a little bit of work to do here. Page 223 of your textbook. If you don't have a textbook yet, remember I told you guys could share, but you need a book. If you don't have a textbook and you're like, well, I did great on the exam, well, I guess good for you. If you don't have a textbook and you're like, I did terrible on the exam, well, maybe that's why. Okay, so I'm on page 223, and this is going to be what I'd like you to work on over the weekend to the best of your ability. Page 223, exercises 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3. We have talked about enough for you to try those. And remember what trying means. It means actually trying and not going, yeah, I don't know what I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Page 223. At a minimum, you can look at the PowerPoints and you can say, well, this is kind of similar to this example in the PowerPoint. I'll just try to follow that. At a minimum, you always have, obviously, I just spent a good bit of time going through all this up here. If you haven't been taking notes, I always post the lecture. But you need to give a good effort. I'm not giving credit for, like I said, half-assed submissions. Okay, so exercise 5.1 is compute the CM ratio and the variable expense ratio. You should know how to do that. Right here, that's this right here, right? Exercise 5.2 gives you part of the template that I've been, like pushing up here like crazy, right? And asks some questions about what happens if sales increase by this amount? What does that do to your net operating income? So what you're going to do for this one in 1, 2, and 3, you're going to recalculate the total column based on an increased number of units. Your number of unit sales is initially 10,000. That's the number that I put up here above the total, right? And then exercise 3, I know you don't see it all, it asks you to calculate what we just did, operating leverage, and then asks a question about verifying it. So these are things we all covered today. 1, 2, and 3, you got about 10 minutes maybe. I can see the time now, so you don't have to tell me what time it is. I do see, I have it up here now. Any questions? You guys can work together if you want. You can't see all of exercise 3 up here because it's just not going to fit. So I'm going to just make sure 1 and 2 fit on here for now. And you'll be responsible for 3 as well. So this is, I'm going to grade this. I'm going to have you turn it in. I don't have a link in there yet, but it will be. Any questions on what you're supposed to do?
Well, it's 223.
Page 223. Yeah, I'm assuming it. I don't know if it's the same page though on the ebook. It is. Okay. Yes, I'm hearing that it is. So. Do your best. You can learn a heck of a lot by going back through the PowerPoints and attempting to do the homework, even if you're not 100% sure. Make the effort. The effort counts.